Asterisk. They were children barely old enough to read the psalms they sang yet. On a winter night in 1893, every voice in St. Romain's choir rose in harmony and never stopped. Not when their throats bled, not when the lanterns went out, not even when the priest sealed the chapel door from the outside and walked away. Some say the hymn still hums beneath the earth. Others say it's not the children you hear anymore. Asterisk. The camera lingers on a winter field, bare trees, frost rising from the soil and thin, pale ribbons where the land folds downward. A stone foundation breaks through the snow slabs half buried, slick with ice. There are no walls left standing, only the skeleton of what was once St. Romain's Abbeyate. Was built in 1841 on land purchased by the diocese for almost nothing. 5 acres of frozen pasture, a single dirt road, twisting miles from the nearest village. They said it was a place for the unwanted orphan street children, those left without names or voices. The abbey itself was simple, almost crude stone quarried from the same hillside. It stood on narrow windows, each cut to let in only a sliver of light, a single bell tower, low and wide, with a rope so frayed that even the wind refused to make a chime inside. The walls were whitewashed but bare. The only color came from a row of wooden choir stalls, polished smooth by years of restless hands, and the faces of the children, 37 in the first. Here alone every record describes the same routine. They woke before dawn. They ate bread and broth. They sang hours each day scales. Psalms, hymns so simple they could be learned in a single morning. The priests who taught them claimed they sang beautifully, but there are no recordings, only photographs, black and white, sepia-stained prints that still exist in archives. At first glance, they look ordinary, a line of children arranged by height, facing the camera. But if you look closer, their mouths are always closed. Every child, every picture, eyes forward, jaw slack, as if about to inhale, as if waiting for something to begin. So, historians say that was just the style of photography at the time. Long exposure stillness was easier than a smile, but the archivist who handled the originals disagrees. He swears the children's lips are parted in each one, not wide, just enough to see a sliver of teeth, not smiling, not breathing, waiting, and no surviving priest, no written diary ever recalls the moment those photos were taken. Every testimony is the same. The camera was set, the children were placed, and then nothing. One priest, Brother Elijah, left a note decades later. After he had left the cloth, it was found folded in the back of his Bible. Long after his death, in faded ink, one line repeated 3 times. Their faces never moved. The abbey itself carried other silences. Travelers who passed by claimed they never heard music, despite the endless hours of choir practice. Only the scrape of boots on stone, only the distant echo of the bell rope creaking. Though no wind moved, villagers began to notice something else. Every child brought to St. Romain's would stop crying the moment they crossed the threshold. Even the sick, the ones taken from deathbeds, would fall silent as soon as the heavy wooden doors shut behind them. Not calmed, not soothed, silent inside those walls. The priests wrote, discipline was effortless. No one shouted, no one wept at night, and no one ever laughed on paper. St. Romain's was a sanctuary, a place to prepare lost children for a holier life, teaching them devotion through song. The diocese praised its methods. Donations grew. By 1855, it housed nearly 100 children, but none of them ever returned to the villages they were taken from. Not one was adopted, not one wrote home, and yet there are no reports of death, no graves marked with their names. The abbey's ledgers list them as transferred. Every single child, year after year, but transferred to where? No one could say. A visiting inspector in 1864 left the only detailed account. He stayed for 3 nights, slept in the guest quarters beneath the bell tower. On his final evening, he wrote, the walls carry a hum, faint but constant, not singing, exactly not a voice. Either something between the two, like a breath that does not end. The inspector died 2 months later of what was called nervous exhaustion. His report was filed and forgotten St. Romains continued as if nothing had happened. Photographs stopped in 1872. There are no images of the final decades, no faces, no choirs, no proof of who lived there. Only one last ledger entry survives dated December 1893. 32 children listed as present. No signatures, no notation of departure. The page ends mid-sentence. F. Archivist, who uncovered it, said the ink felt strange, thick, almost tacky. Even a century later, and at the bottom corner, faint but visible, was a small black smudge, shaped like a thumbprint, not human-sized, too narrow, too long. Whatever happened at St. Romains began in silence, even now feels deliberate, because sometimes, when the wind cuts low across the empty field where the abbey once stood, it carries something faint with it, not a song, not a voice, just the intake of breath, waiting to be released. Snow falls in heavy, soundless sheets. It clings to the eaves of the abbey roof, stacks along the frozen stone steps, untouched by boots or broom inside. The air is warm. A coal stove burns in the corner of the main hall. Its glow barely reaches the edges of the room. The choir children sit on wooden benches, 32 of them, still as statues. It is the first week of December, 1893. No storms were expected that winter, but the sky, for reasons no one could explain, stayed dark even during the day. By the third night, the road to the abbey was gone, buried under snow that fell without wind, without pause. The priests kept the routine morning bread, lessons, hymn practice in the chapel, evening prayer. But on the fourth night, as dusk slipped in, the singing began. It started in the girls' dormitory, one voice, faint, humming a slow, unfamiliar melody. The others joined, one by one. Without prompting, there was no sheet music, no instruction. Each child seemed to know exactly where to place their voice, as if the song had been rehearsed for years. Father Kettering, who oversaw the dormitories, approached the doorway. He leaned against the frame, listening. The words, if they were words, were not English, not Latin. Each syllable curved and sank, more breath than sound, like something spoken underwater. But the harmony was perfect. Every note sat on the next, like a stone in a wall. He cleared his throat to interrupt. Voices did not stop. He shouted, loud enough to wake the priests downstairs. Still, the children sang, eyes closed, mouths moving in slow, deliberate shapes. By morning, the melody had spread. The boys sang as they carried coal to the stove, the kitchen filled with the same soft, rolling verses as spoons clattered in bowls. Even the smallest child, barely old enough to form full words, moved his lips in time. Tone steady, breath unbroken. The priests gathered in the chapel to discuss. They tried to write the phonetics of the hymn, but none of them could keep up with the shifting syllables. Every time the lines repeated, something changed. A vowel stretched. Longer, a pause fell in a new place. The song was familiar, but never identical. Brother Elijah suggested it might be glossolalia, speaking in tongues, a gift of the Spirit, but none of the priests had seen it manifest so uniformly. Never in children, and never in song. By the sixth day, the snow sealed the last exits. The gates were buried chest deep. The chapel doors froze in place. The abbey became a sealed chamber, warm but isolated, lit only by oil lamps and the faint, steady glow of the stove. And still, the voices did not stop. They sang through meals, soup spilled, spoons clinking, the verses never breaking. They sang while scrubbing the floors, while lighting candles for evening prayers. When they lay down at night, the harmony softened, but did not fade. Some murmured even in their sleep, their lips twitching against the pillow, the tune weaving through their breathing. One priest, Father Kettering, stayed awake 3 nights to observe. He said it was impossible to tell where one breath ended and another began. The voices rose and fell as if connected, not by choice, but by something deeper, something shared on the 11th day. His notes became erratic, the ink darker, his hand unsteady. The last line written before he stopped reads only, "They do not tire. Their lungs should not allow this. But they do not stop by then. The priests had stopped trying to intervene. Each attempt, whether by command, prayer, or even force only, led to the same result. The children would pause, turn their heads in unison, and hum a single, rising note loud, enough to rattle the glass. In the chapel windows, then they would return to the hymn, seamlessly, as if the interruption had not happened. Father Brennan, the Abbey's overseer, wrote his first letter to the diocese on December 14th. He described the conditions plainly: the snow, the song, the fact that no food seemed to diminish, despite the storerooms never being restocked. He requested aid, a carriage, an escort to bring the children to the city. The letter was never delivered. When search parties found it months later, the parchment was brittle. The ink had bled into the fibers, smudged by moisture, or by something else. The wax seal remained unbroken. The song, according to the few surviving documents, lasted for 16 consecutive days. It did not stop when the snow pressed the roof beams. It did not stop when oil for the lamps burned away, leaving the halls in darkness. It did not stop when Father Kettering collapsed on the chapel floor from exhaustion. The last date in the Abbey's ledger, December 28, 1893, contains no notes, no signatures, just a single line scrawled in the margin. The handwriting does not match any known priest. It is not their song anymore. After that, the records fall silent. The snow finally thawed by late February. The road to the Abbey was cleared. But when the first searchers reached the gates, they found the choir stalls empty, the benches overturned, no children, no priests, only a faint, rhythmic hum barely audible coming from beneath the chapel floorboards. And then, nothing. The lantern light flickers against the chapel walls. Long shadows crawl over the whitewashed plaster. The iron door hinges, blackened with age, glint faintly at the edge of the frame. Father Brennan stands near the altar. His breath is visible in the cold air, though the coal stove burns faintly behind him. It is December 17, 1893. The children have not stopped singing for 13 nights. Not once. Their voices drift from the dormitories upstairs, low, steady, weaving through the timbers of the building like wind through hollow pipes. No melody, now only a single droning chord, rising and falling as if carried on a tide. Brennan presses his hand to the altar rail. The wood feels warm, too warm. The stove heat cannot reach this far. He closes his eyes, listens above him. In the vaulted shadows, where the rafters vanish, something faint stirs. Not the children, not the wind. A murmur, a breathless tone, low and indistinct, like a voice not shaped for human words. But he hears it clearly. Seal it. It says, not loud, not commanding, just inevitable. He opens his eyes. The sound is gone. The droning continues overhead. He does not speak of it to the others. Instead, he orders the 2 sacristans to fetch the iron crossbar from the vestry. A protest. It has not been used in decades. It was forged only to hold the doors shut in storms, or in the event of a riot. But Brennan insists the bar is cold when they lift it. Frost blooms on their fingers as they slide it into place across the double doors. The metal locks into the brackets. With a hollow, final thud, the Abbey is sealed. No one in, no one out. Brennan does not explain why he only tells the priests to remain in their quarters, to keep the lamps lit, and to pray. Even if their voices shake that night, his journal entries grow strange. Script uneven, as if written in a moving carriage. The ink pools where the pen stalls. The first page reads clearly enough. The children do not belong to us anymore. We are witnesses only. We must hold them here until. The sentence trails off on the next page. The handwriting is smaller, as if he were afraid of being overheard. The words. The voice is above the altar again. It hums with the rafters. It tells me they are not in pain, but it tells me to keep them. The last entry comes just before dawn. The pen strokes are jagged, uneven, as though his hand trembled. One line, written 3 times. I cannot tell if I am writing, or if it is by morning. Brennan is gone. The priests find his room empty, his cassock still folded on the chair, his boots by the bedside, the journal left open on the desk, ink still wet where the pen had slipped from his hand. The iron doors remain barred. The crossbar is frozen in place, impossible to lift. No one can explain why. It should slide free, but it feels fused, as though the metal itself has grown into the brackets. The children's song has changed, no longer a drone, no longer a chord. It is softer now, measured, as if the voices are counting something, each syllable marking a beat, each note landing heavier than the last one of the younger priests. Brother Cole approaches the chapel doors to listen. He leans against the wood, ear pressed to the cold grain at first. All he hears is the hum, layered and soft. But then, a pause. The singing stops all at once. The silence inside is absolute. He thinks, for a moment, that they have finally stopped, and that's when he hears Ida's single breath, drawn in just behind the door, slow, deliberate, too long to belong to a child. Stumbles back. The hymn begins again, seamless, as though the pause had never happened that night. Brother Cole swears. He hears footsteps in the hall, outside his quarters. Not the shuffle of the other priests, not the soft steps of a child. These are heavier, measured pacing back and forth, as if waiting when he opens the door. The corridor is empty. Only the faint echo of the children's voices drifts down from above, curling through the darkness like smoke by the next morning. Father Brennan's journal is gone. His name struck through in the Abbey ledger. No note, no explanation, just a thin black line. The iron doors remain sealed, and the voice above the altar keeps humming. The road winds through a stretch of barren forest. Bare branches claw at the sky. The snow, packed in gray, bears no tracks but a single broken line. A line made by someone crawling it. Was February 894 when they found her. A farmer, hauling timber to the main road, noticed the movement first. Not walking, not even stumbling, just dragging herself forward, one arm at a time, leaving shallow grooves in the frost. Her name was Mary Thatch, 10 years old, one of the 32 children housed at St. Romang's Abbey. That winter she was barefoot. Her lips were cracked and bloodless. Frost rimed her eyelashes, turning her blinks into small, painful shudders. And yet, she was breathing slowly, deliberately, almost too calmly for a child who had crawled 3 miles through the cold. The farmer called to her. She stopped, lifted her head slightly. Her eyes met his, dull and unblinking, as if she had forgotten how to focus when he asked her name. She didn't answer when he asked where she came from. She raised a trembling hand and pointed back toward the hills, toward St. Romang's, but something wasn't right when he hoisted her into his cart. She made no sound, not a whimper, not a breath of relief, not even when he wrapped her in his coat, her skin as cold as the air around them. She did not speak, not that day, not the next, not for the rest of her life. Doctors in the village examined her. Her throat showed no damage. Her vocal cords were intact, her lungs strong. By all accounts, she could speak. She simply didn't. He tried everything: written questions, drawings, soft hymns sung to her bedside, hoping she might hum along, but her lips stayed closed. She listened, always listened, her eyes shifting, as if she were following something only she could hear. The only time she reacted was when someone mentioned the Abbey. The moment its name was spoken, her pupils dilated, her fingers curled tight against her palms, and the corners of her mouth twitched, just slightly. Not a smile, not a frown, something in between, as if her face remembered how to move, but her voice refused to follow. She lived with a host family for the next year, sat in the back pew of the chapel every Sunday, silent, never bowed her head, never prayed. Her foster mother said she would sit awake at night, staring at the ceiling, her lips moving without sound. They called it a nervous affliction, a trauma response. But the longer she stayed, the more the others grew. Unsettled farmhands refused to sleep in the same house. They claimed they heard faint murmurs at night, not from Mary's room, but beneath the floorboards, as if something was echoing her silent words from below. By 1896, she was moved again and again, each time the same pattern. She never spoke. She never aged out of that distant stare, and those living with her swore they heard something, a faint hum, a breathy melody following her. Even when she slept decades past, Mary grew into adulthood, thin and pale, her hair prematurely gray. She worked in quiet places, candle shops, seamstress rooms, libraries where the air was still, always watching, always listening. Her silence became so complete that most forgot she had a voice to lose it. It was only in the final weeks of her life that she broke it, not with speech, but with ink on the night. She died October 1938. A caretaker found a single page folded beneath her pillow. The handwriting was careful, almost elegant, though the letters slanted downward, as if her hand shook while writing. It said, "They kept singing. It was not them anymore." Beneath the words was a single line, drawn in ink so dark it had bled through the paper, a long, straight line. No explanation, no signature. The caretaker swore he heard something as he read it. Not in the room, not in the hallway, but faintly, far away, carried on the wind through the cracked window, a single note, low, unbroken like the first hum of a choir warming its voice. He turned to close the window, but outside, the trees were still, the road empty. Only the note remained, distant and steady, and when he looked back, the page was gone. The ruins of Saint Romain sit beneath a gray, overcast sky. The bell tower is gone, collapsed into its own foundation. The chapel walls lean inward, cracked, their mortar eaten by years of frost and rain. What remains of the roof sags like wet paper. In 1911, the Vatican sent 3 men here, Father Callisto, Father Moraine, and Father Rourke. We're told it was not a cleansing, not a burial rite, an exorcism. Though the ruins were long abandoned, the order came with a single line attached: "The voices have returned." When they arrived, the air was colder inside the chapel than it was in the snow outside. The wind, somehow, did not reach the nave. The walls breathed stillness, thick and heavy, as though the stones themselves had been waiting. They set their candles in a triangle before the altar. The floor beneath it was blackened, not by fire, but by something seeping up through the cracks. The marks were old, older than the priests had expected, and shaped faintly, like concentric circles. But something wasn't right. The first sound came not from the ruins, not from the wind outside. It came from below, faint, measured, like a breath that caught in the throat of the earth itself. Men froze. Callisto held his hand up, signaling silence. The sound rose, a single sustained note, low and unbroken. It trembled against the stones beneath their feet, more felt than heard, and that's when he heard a second note, higher, distant, but moving closer, like something shifting along the walls of an unseen corridor. Then a third, weaving between the first 2, forming a harmony that no voice should carry. Not from below, not from anywhere. The priests began the litany, voices firm but uneasy, Latin phrases echoing against the cold, damp stone. But the notes beneath them did not falter. They grew louder, not violent, not mocking, just steady, as if the men were intruders interrupting a practice already in progress. Callisto lit the thurible, letting incense smoke curl through the air. It did not rise. It spread outward instead, drifting low to the floor, as if drawn by something unseen. Each coil of smoke moved in rhythm with the notes, spiraling when the pitch shifted, flattening when it held. Moraine swore the smoke formed shapes, not faces, not figures, just open mouths, endless rows, yawning soundlessly in the haze. He dropped the thurible. The coals hissed and scattered, burning holes into the wooden floorboards. The notes did not break, they only swelled, filling the space with a resonance so deep it made the candle flames bend inward. The men tried to continue the rite, but Rourke faltered first. He gripped his ears, falling to his knees. He whispered that the sound wasn't entering through the air, was crawling up through his bones. Each note thrummed against his ribs, his teeth, his spine. Callisto grabbed him, tried to drag him toward the exit. The iron door stood open. The snow piled high outside, but the moment they crossed the chapel threshold, the notes shifted, not louder, not faster, just closer, as if whatever carried them had turned to follow the priests, bolted through the snow. Stumbling, their candles abandoned, their vestments heavy with frost. They did not speak until they reached the tree line, lungs burning from the cold only. One of them made it back to the village. Father Morana, his eyes were pale when they found him not clouded, not diseased, just blank, as if every color had been drained from the irises. His pupils did not contract. Even when held to the light, he did not hear the doctor's questions, did not respond to the bishop's prayers. His ears were healthy, his tongue intact, but his senses, whatever bound them to the world, seemed to have gone silent except on the final night of his life. He whispered one thing barely audible. The words cracked and broken, as though his voice had forgotten how to form them. It is not a possession, it is a rehearsal. He died before dawn. The other two priests were never found. When investigators returned to the ruins weeks later, the candles were still there. The wax had not dripped the flames, though the wicks were long cold, had left a residue along the altar rail, a faint, chalky line, not wax, not ash, more like salt. The concentric circles beneath the altar had deepened, etched deeper into the wood, as if carved by a hand too precise to tremble. And faintly, when the wind pressed low against the hills, the investigators claimed they could hear something beneath the chapel stones. Not voices, not words, just a chord slow, endless, as if the rehearsal had not yet ended. The field where St. Romang's once stood lies open. Now walls, no tower, only a wide, uneven patch of earth where the chapel's foundation still breaks through the frost every December. The snow buries the stones. The wind cuts through the pines. The land falls silent, except for one thing on the night of the 14th, the same night the choir first began its endless hymn. Something stirs beneath the ground, a tremor, not sharp, like an earthquake, not violent, just low, steady, a rhythm that feels deliberate, as if the earth itself were breathing. The first reports came from the farmers, men who grazed their cattle on the edges of the old abbey land after its demolition. They noticed their livestock would stop grazing at dusk. The animals would turn, heads low, backs arched, and move away from the foundation stones in silence. Not running, not panicked, just leaving. By morning, the snow near the old altar site would be pressed flat, perfectly flat, as if something had been resting beneath it, weight enough to smooth even the uneven earth. No tracks led in, no tracks led out, but something wasn't right. Hunters who passed through the grounds on those nights swore they felt the tremor through their boots, a subtle push upward, as though the soil flexed with each pulse. Some said it felt like a slow heartbeat. Others described it as a deep vibration, rising through their legs, settling in their teeth until they could hear nothing but the faint buzz of their own bones. One hunter, a man named Jonah Crane, carried a compass on his belt when he passed near the altar stone. The needle spun, slow at first, then faster, until it locked in place, not pointing north, but toward the center of the old chapel floor. Even when he turned, the needle followed, dragging his hand toward the altar as if pulled by an unseen magnet. Left before dark, he did not return the next year. Be the 1920s. Locals had learned to avoid the land entirely on that date. They said the ground felt wrong, soft, though frozen, as if there was a hollow beneath the soil, something just deep enough to hold the weight of the chapel, and more. And that's when he heard a man named Edgar Long, passing through the woods on December 14th, claimed he heard a sound rising up with the tremor. Not wind, not shifting rock, a tone low, sustained, rising faintly through the soles of his boots. He pressed his ear to the ground. The sound grew clearer. It was not a single note. It was layered, one long, deep chord, and above it, faint, a pattern of shorter, softer notes. Not loud enough to call music, not enough to form words, but the rhythm. Matched breath, inhale, exhale, endless long, didn't stay. When he pulled his head from the earth, his ears rang, not with pain, but with the impression that something had heard him, too, that the sound beneath the soil had changed the moment he listened. The altar stone itself carries its own pattern over the years. Its surface has fractured into thin, spidery veins, as if something beneath had been pressing upward, searching for air. Every December 14th, frost forms along those cracks. First, curling outward in perfect concentric lines. Not random, not like any natural pattern the farmers have seen. The lines always form in circles, wide enough to match the diameter of the old choir stall. Surveyors have tried to measure the tremor too. Chart the cause their instruments always fail. Needles spin, wires buzz. The readings spike in intervals, each exactly 32 seconds apart, the same number as the children housed in the abbey during its final. Winter One team left their equipment running overnight, hoping to record the vibrations for study. When they returned the next morning, every device was dead. The wires inside each machine had been twisted into knots, as though spun by a careful, patient hand. Only one thing remained intact: a reel of magnetic tape, still wound tight in its case. The tape itself, when played, carried no music, no hum, just a faint, rhythmic scrape, like something shifting just below the microphone, moving in circles on the final second of the recording. The tape captured a single pulse louder than the rest. Not a note, not a voice, just one long, deep exhale. The researchers didn't return now. Every year, those who live near the ruins know to stay indoors when the night comes, to keep the windows shut, to ignore the faint trembling of the floorboards beneath their beds, because those who linger too close to St. Romain's claim that if you kneel on the frozen earth, press your hand flat against the soil, and stay perfectly still, the tremor will pause only for a moment, and then, faintly, something will tap back, once, twice, then stop, as if waiting for you to answer. The ruins sit silent beneath a pale winter. Sky frost rims the blackened altar stone. The wind slides low across the broken foundation, carrying nothing but the sound of branches shifting in the pines. In 1974, 4 researchers drove up the narrow road that led here, a 2-car convoy, carrying cameras, microphones, and a reel-to-reel recorder. They weren't priests, not even believers, just a team from a small university, collecting evidence for a study on cultural haunting. They set up their equipment as the sun dipped behind the trees, microphones on steel stands, lenses trained on the collapsed walls, the altar, the remains of the choir loft cables snaked. Through the snow like black veins, the air was still, so still that their own movements sounded louder than they should. Boots on stone, gloved hands adjusting knobs, hushed voices rising just to fill the silence. The first hour gave them nothing. The tape hissed softly, capturing only the faint whisper of wind. No voices, no tremors, only the natural quiet of an empty field. Then, at 9:12 p.m., one of the microphones shifted. The steel stand tilted forward. Though the ground was flat, the researchers checked the legs. Solid. The wind had not changed, but something wasn't right. On playback, the recorder captured something they hadn't heard in the moment. A faint tone, so low it almost blended with the hiss of the tape. Not mechanical, not the hum of their equipment. It pulsed every few seconds, soft and regular, like a slow inhalation. They kept recording. By 10:03 p.m., the tone had grown louder, still faint, still easy to dismiss, but no longer background. It came in layers now, a long, drawn-out note, and beneath it, shorter tones, 3 at a time, each one perfectly spaced. The team adjusted their gain levels. One of them, a technician named Sarah Holt, whispered that it almost sounded like a voice, trying to find a pitch. No one answered her. At 10:46 p.m., the wind stopped entirely. The snow, which had been falling lightly since dusk, hung in the air for a moment, before drifting straight down. The microphones captured something new, singing, very faint, distant, but not distorted. The voices were soft, layered, and childlike. They carried no melody the researchers could place, no words they could make out, just a patter of notes, rising and falling in waves, as though following a conductor they could not see. The team marked the tape, checked their watches. The singing grew clearer, though the air around them remained still. Each note echoed against the broken stones, as if the walls themselves remembered how to hold sound. And that's when he heard it. The field director, Tom Calder, leaned into one of the live monitors between the soft voices. Beneath the rise and fall of the notes, he swore he heard breathing, not in rhythm with the song, slower, heavier, like something listening, close to the microphone. Just beyond their line of sight, he told the others to stop moving the tape, continued to roll. The singing never faltered. Then, at 10:49 p.m., the voices ceased. No fade, no gradual drop, just silence. The tape hissed for 8 full seconds. No wind, no movement, only the static buzz of the reel, and then a voice high, childlike, but the words it spoke were perfect, precise Latin, the accent crisp. As if read from a liturgy, 3 words. Main audi junge, stay, listen, join. The voice lingered on the last syllable. The G, curling softly before cutting to silence. The reel kept spinning, but the microphones captured nothing else, not the wind, not the shifting snow, not even the sound of the researchers moving, though they remembered holding their breath the entire time. When they packed their equipment, no one spoke. The air felt heavier than it had before, as if sound itself had thickened. Calder checked the recorder twice. The reels were intact, the playback clean. But when they listened again that night, back at the university, something new surfaced in the moments before the child's voice, barely audible. Buried in the layers of static and hiss, there was another sound, not a note, not a word, a faint, steady tapping, 3 beats, a pause, 3 beats again, always 6 in total, perfectly timed, like a hand knocking from a long distance away. The last 3 minutes of the tape became evidence, filed in the university archives, locked behind glass. But by 1981, the reel was gone. Only the written transcript of voice remains. Those who handled it swear the tape never degraded, never cracked or warped, even when others in the collection turned brittle with time. But anyone who listened to it claimed they heard something different after each play. Sometimes the tapping, sometimes a new voice beneath the first, always faint, always patient. The last person to hear the recording before it vanished was Sarah Holt, the technician. She told a colleague that on her final listen, the child's voice had not stopped at junge. It had whispered something else. Her colleague asked what it said. Sarah only shook her head, eyes fixed somewhere beyond the floor. And she never stepped into a recording studio. Again, the land where Saint-Romain's once stood was quiet by 1985. No walls remained, only frost-stained stones, half swallowed by weeds and snow, marking where the foundation had once cut into the hill. The pines around it stood like sentries, tall and unbending, their trunks blackened near the roots from a fire no one remembered starting. The diocese called it a hazard. Officially, that's all it was, a decaying ruin, an unstable pit where bricks and splintered wood might collapse on anyone foolish enough to wander too close. But no one in the nearby towns believed that, not after the tremors, not after the tapes, not after the stories of Mary Thatch, and the priests, and the whispers that seemed to travel farther than any wind still. The church made its decision. The order was signed. The ruins would be leveled, the altar stone broken apart, the ground filled, the land sealed and sold. The first machines arrived in early spring, bulldozers, their yellow paint dull against the pale landscape, crawled up the road with their engines growling low. 6 men worked the first shift, none from the local towns, all brought in from 2 counties away, paid extra for the contract no one else would take. The foreman, a man named Douglas Vane, walked the perimeter with his boots crunching over frost. He marked the foundation, measuring the depth of the old choir loft and nave. He said later, the air felt heavier inside the broken walls, still close, as if he'd stepped into a room with the door sealed behind him. But something wasn't right when the first machine cut into the soil near the altar. Its engine stalled. The operator checked the fuel, the battery, the lines. Everything was intact. The moment they rolled it back from the altar's edge, the machine roared to life again. They switched to hand tools, shovels, picks, breaking apart the cracked frost in silence. Every strike echoed, not upward, but downward, as though the sound was being pulled into the ground beneath them by dusk. They had cleared the surface layer. The altar stone, long fractured, was finally exposed its veins. Those spidery cracks spread wider than the workers had expected, reaching beyond the original foundation, each one filled with frost, so dense it looked like glass. And that's when he heard it, the youngest of the crew. A man named Ellis Ward froze mid-swing. He swore he heard a note, faint and hollow, rising from beneath the ground, not from any instrument, not a voice, just a single tone, stretched thin, like the lowest key of an organ, pressed and held. The others laughed, but when they fell quiet, they heard it too. The sound seemed to pulse beneath their boots, faint, but constant, its pitch rising for only a breath before sinking back down again. Not wind, not vibration from the machines. The bulldozers were silent. They worked through it. No one spoke of the sound again, but every man kept glancing at the cracks, watching the frost within them curl and shift as though stirred by air from below by the second day. The ruins were gone, stone and timber hauled away in trucks. The altar stone cracked into 3 slabs and buried in separate landfill sites, each one more than 50 miles from the others. The soil was leveled, grass seeds scattered, though it would never take. The diocese filed its report. St. Romain's was, at last, erased. The land, they said, was cleansed of its hazard, closed. But the workers, who left that final night, never forgot what they heard as they packed their tools and climbed into their trucks. The sun already gone. The wind picked up through the pines at first. It was only the creak of branches. Then, beneath it, something else, a low sequence of notes, organ keys faint, but rising from the soil itself, where the chapel floor had once stood. 3 tones, a pause, 3 tones again. Measured, deliberate. Ward, sitting in the cab beside Vane, said his chest ached when the notes played, not pain, pressure, as though the sound had pressed up through the ground, through the frame of the wall. Truck settling behind his ribs when they drove away. The notes followed them, not in volume, not in distance, but in rhythm. Every bump of the truck along the frozen road seemed to match the pauses between those tones, as though the ground itself had begun to keep time. None of the men took another job for the diocese. Most never spoke of it again. But Ward, he told his brother something strange. The sound, he said, hadn't stopped when they left the site. It hadn't even stopped when he got home lying in bed that night. He felt it again, not through the walls, not through the air, through the mattress, through the frame beneath him. Single, soft vibration, 3 pulses, a pause, then 3 again, as though something far below the soil was still playing, still keeping the time. Even after the chapel above had been erased, the field where St. Romain's once stood is flat, now a wide expanse of brittle grass and frost-cracked soil, broken only by the faint outline of where the foundation had cut into the hill. On clear nights, the ground shines pale beneath the moonlight, as if dusted with something colder than snowing 2015. A survey crew arrived to map the land, not ghost hunters, not priests, engineers. They were hired to prepare the field for sale. To determine whether it could hold the weight of a planned development, they brought ground-penetrating radar. An array of sensors dragged slowly over the soil, tracing grids with quiet precision. The machines hummed softly as they passed, their monitors casting green light across the frost for hours. The scans came back clean, hard-pan soil, rock, no voids. Beneath the surface then, just after 11 meters, readings shifted. The radar showed shadows beneath the earth, not caves, not sinkholes, chambers rectangular, stacked like corridors. At a depth no records had ever shown, each one aligned exactly beneath where the chapel nave and choir loft had once stood. But something wasn't right. The chambers weren't empty. On playback, the scanners registered distortions, tiny fluctuations in the signal, like interference, not mechanical, not random. The distortions came in waves, rising and falling in patterns that almost resembled sound. The crew ran the data through audio processing. The frequencies formed a sequence, not words, not notes, harmonics layered, choral, each one just sharp enough to feel unnatural, as though the tones were echoing from a space much larger than the chambers themselves at first. The distortion lasted only seconds by the third pass. It stretched to nearly 2 minutes one. Long swell, low and soft, then another above it higher, thinner, wavering like breath pulled through metal pipes. The crew assumed equipment failure. Loose connections cross-talk between the radar sensors. They checked the leads, all intact. Harmonics remained, and that's when he heard it. The youngest technician, Daniel Fry, leaned close to the playback, his ear nearly brushing the speaker beneath the harmonics, so faint it almost hid within the static. He swore he heard something else. A voice, not clear, not loud, just one syllable, stretched and warping with each distortion. He couldn't make out the word, but he said it didn't sound recorded. It sounded close, like it was speaking from the speaker itself, not from the tape. The others dismissed him. They focused on the data, exporting the recordings, labeling each distortion with timestamps. By the time they shut the machines down, the harmonics had faded, leaving only the steady hum of their equipment. Files were sent to the lab for analysis, but when the first researcher opened the audio, something happened. Every waveform was intact, every timestamp matched, but the last 30 seconds of each recording played differently than the others. Instead of harmonics, the tape carried a low, constant hum, joined by a faint series of overlapping tones. They didn't match the distortions recorded in the field. They didn't match any known interference pattern, and worse, every playback shifted on the first listen. The tones were soft, almost distant. On the second, they grew closer, clearer, layered now with the faint impression of breaths, like a choir pausing between verses. By the third playback, the files wouldn't open at all, each one corrupted. The data scrambled into unreadable fragments. Every attempt to restore them failed. The only surviving copy was a 32-second loop, buried in a temp folder. Discovered by accident weeks later, the loop carried nothing but the harmonics, low-layered, and beneath them, faint, a single exhale, drawn out slow, almost relieved. Fry listened to that loop late one night. Alone in the lab, he played it twice. On the third, as the harmonics swelled, he swore he heard something shift beneath the breath. Not a word, not a melody, a vibration, low and deliberate, rising just enough to feel, not hear, through the floor beneath his chair. He pulled off the headphones. The vibration didn't stop. Lab was silent, the computers idle, but the floorboards still trembled, faintly, as if something far below the building had started to stir. Fry left that night without logging the incident. The loop was erased the next morning. No one admitted deleting it, and the planned development on the St. Romain's land was quietly abandoned. The chambers beneath the field remain untouched, their depth, their size, their purpose unexplored. But those who walk the property in winter claim that if you stand at the center, where the altar once rested, and close your eyes, you can feel something through your feet. Not a tremor, not the hum of machinery, just a slow, layered resonance, like a distant choir waiting for a conductor's hand to rise. The field where St. Romain's once stood lies still beneath a slate-colored sky. The grass, brittle and sparse, bends in a wind that never feels warm. Even in midsummer, there are no markers left, no stones, no plaques, nothing to suggest a building ever stood here. Only the faint depression in the earth, where the foundation had once cut deep into the hillside. At night, it feels different. The cold deepens, the air takes on a weight that pulls at the chest. No animals cross the field after dark, not the deer, not even the stray dogs from town. Locals say you can test it yourself if you stand there, exactly where the altar had rested, and hum softly into the air. Something will answer, not loud, not immediate, but a faint harmony, low, layered, rising to meet your note, like a voice just beyond the edge of hearing. The first few to try it did so on dares, teenagers, drunk or bored, who laughed until the sound came and they stopped laughing, because the harmony never comes from one direction. It surrounds you thin, at first, as though drifting on the wind, but as your own voice falters, the sound remains, and sometimes quietly, It bends to match a pitch you didn't choose, but something wasn't right one man. Robert K. drove from a nearby town in 2019. To see if the stories were true, he parked by the tree line and walked out onto the grass under a pale, starless sky. He stood still, exhaled, and hummed one long note, middle C flat and steady, for 2 seconds. There was nothing then, faint and soft. A second tone rose from the ground beneath his feet. Not an echo, a harmony low, almost felt more than. Heard it pulsed gently, like breath gaze stopped humming. The harmony continued slowly fading, until it dissolved back into the stillness of the air. He left before midnight, but the sound followed him. He heard it in the car, faint at first, not through the speakers, not through the air, inside his chest, as if something beneath his ribs was keeping the tone alive. The next morning, when he tried to hum again, nothing came out. His throat moved, his lungs pushed the air, but no sound left his mouth. He could hear his breath, but not his voice. And that's when he heard it, the harmony, still there, low, constant, filling the silence where his own voice had been. Doctors found nothing wrong. His vocal cords were intact, his lungs healthy. But every recording made of him since captures the same thing, a soft, steady tone layered beneath his silence, as if something else is carrying his breath for him. He isn't the only one in the years since. More have tried, some out of curiosity, some to disprove the stories. A few never speak again, not because they lose the ability, because when they try, the harmony rises louder, swallowing whatever sound they attempt to make until their own voice feels replaced. The field remains unmarked. The diocese has no record of it now. No parish claims it, no local map labels the land, but those who live nearby know where it is, and they know never to stand there after midnight, because the sound doesn't just rise when called. Some say it waits, quiet, patient, just beneath the soil, like a breath held for too long, and those who linger too long swear they can feel it, not through their ears, but through their bones. A hum, soft and deliberate, pressing upward from the earth in slow, measured pulses, one note at a time, always in harmony, always waiting for someone to start the song again. And when it does, you may not hear yourself leave asterisk. If salvation is a song, perhaps some voices were never meant to stop singing. Perhaps some prayers were not for heaven, but for the earth beneath it. And if you ever hum a note at St. Ramon's and something hums back, remember, not every choir sings for God. Asterisk.